The gavel slammed so hard the tent lights rattled, and the crowd's laughter snagged on the canvas roof like thorns. A brindled dog with a torn ear and a chain-scuffed neck stood trembling on the sandy floor of the county fair auction ring. He didn't bark. He didn't whine. He stared straight past the auctioneer, past the rows of boots and pearls and paper paddles, and locked eyes with a young man standing in the very back. In that instant, the noise thinned to a thin, high ring. The dog's chest rose. The young man, Evan, felt it like a hand closing around his own heart. Last chance. The auctioneer hollered, amusement creeping into his tone. This one's been through twice, skittish, no papers. You take your chances. From the bleachers, someone muttered, good for coyote bait. Another voice, careless and cruel. Or the meat plant. The dog flinched. Evan's hand lifted a little. Then a little more, as if pulled by a string only he could see. He was 22, all elbows and stubbornness, a mechanic's apprentice who still lived over his late father's garage. He had lost more than his father that year, a steady job, the rhythm of the house, the quiet laughter at breakfast. Everything felt like an echo, but his dad had said something that wouldn't stop circling back. If you ever get a chance to do the right thing, do it fast. Don't wait for the perfect reason. Evan's paddle went up. I'll take him, he said, voice almost too small for the tent. The auctioneer blinked as if he'd misheard. Sold! He snapped anyway, the gavel falling with a crack that made the dog jump. The crowd buzzed with relief, disappointment, a little pity. Evan walked down the aisle, weaving through a forest of denim and perfume. The dog lowered his head as the handler shoved the leash into Evan's hands. Up close, the animal was larger than he'd seemed at a distance. Thick-chested, scar-mapped, the kind of dog people crossed the street to avoid. His coat was a river of brown and black, rippling with the faint, awkward shiver of a creature who'd been told too many times that the world was not safe. Hey, buddy, Evan said softly, the word a habit from the garage, what his dad used to call him. What he used to call stubborn bolts and finicky carburetors. The dog's ears pricked. Buddy, Evan repeated, trying it on him. The tail gave a single, uncertain wag. Buddy. Outside, the afternoon light felt almost holy after the circus glare of the tent. The fairground hummed, Ferris wheel creaking, music from a distant speaker trying to claw through a cottony layer of announcements and laughter. Evan crouched and offered the back of his hand. Buddy sniffed it, eyes quick and intelligent. When the leash went slack, Evan didn't tug. He simply stood and started walking toward his old pickup. Buddy followed. Not dragging, not darting, falling into step at Evan's left knee, head slightly ahead, like he'd done it 1,000 times. It wasn't the uncertain wobble of a shelter dog. It was muscle memory. Trained. Evan paused at the truck door. You know heel? He asked, just to hear himself say it. Buddy sat, a voice piped up from behind him. You got him for $90, a girl said, the kind of factual cruelty that rides on young tongues. He's a reject, Evan looked over his shoulder. A woman in her 30s, dark hair, bright eyes, smiled apologetically and tugged the girl closer. She doesn't mean it like that, the woman, Grace, said. He's beautiful. Buddy watched them without blinking. The way he measured distance made Evan think of a chessboard. Calculations, exit routes. If there was fear, it wore armor made of discipline. Thanks, Evan said, and slid open the passenger door. Buddy didn't jump up. He stepped back, chest lifting and falling. Then he paced a tight circle, nose bobbing toward the east, toward the hills that framed the fairground like the long backs of sleeping giants. He whined, Not loud, just enough to vibrate the air between them. You want to go that way? Evan asked, feeling ridiculous. Buddy whined again, pawed the ground, and looked at the hills. The wind shifted. A faint metallic tang hit Evan's tongue. Storm weather, probably. He patted the seat. Come on, big guy. Buddy hesitated, then hopped in. Once inside, he curled without touching the door, as if mindful of the thin line between comfort and disrespect. Evan started the truck. The dog's head lifted, ears twitching at each gear change. He drove through town with one hand on the wheel and the other on the silence, trying to shape it into something like courage. Beside him, Buddy stared out the windshield with battlefield stillness. When the church bells chimed 4 o'clock, Buddy's ears pricked, then settled. At the second chime, and only the second, his tail thumped twice against the seat. Evan counted the beats without meaning to. Halfway to the garage, the sky darkened. A sheet of wind rolled across the street, tumbling paper cups and lifting the scent of rain. Buddy sat up, his mouth closed. The truck's engine sounded suddenly loud, like a living thing shouting. And then Evan heard it, the faint, thin voice of a child somewhere beyond the wind, carried from the direction of the corn maze on the far side of town. He almost told himself he'd imagined it. But Buddy's head snapped to the right. He let out a low, disciplined woof. Not alarm. An alert. Evan turned the wheel. By the time they reached Thornton's pumpkin patch, the first drops of rain had fattened into a hard staccato. People were already hustling children to cars, lightning nipping at the edges of the sky. Mrs. Thornton herself, cheeks flushed, was shouting to whoever would listen. "She wandered off before the siren," she cried. "My granddaughter Emma, she loves the maze. Buddy was out of the truck before Evan could grab the leash. He didn't run. He stood square, nose cutting lines in the wet air, as if reading a map no one else could see. Then he took off toward the maze entrance with a long, efficient stride. "Wait!" Evan yelled, lunging. He left the door open and followed, rain instantly welding his shirt to his spine. The stalks writhed in the wind, the maze a living creature. Buddy disappeared around a corner, reappeared, took a different turn. He didn't bark. Occasionally, he'd look back to make sure Evan was still there. In those glances, Evan saw something that made his throat tighten. Permission sought, trust given. They reached a dead end. Buddy stopped, sniffed the mud, then pressed both front paws against the hedge of stalks and pushed at a seam that wasn't a path, just a weakness in the corn. He squeezed through and looked back. "Here," his eyes said. "This way, even if it isn't the way you made." Evan shoved into the crack, arms up to guard his face. Leaves slapped him, mud kissed his boots and then pulled greedily. Thunder glided over them like a heavy door. He heard it again, less like a voice and more like the ghost of one. "Mom." And then louder, "Help!" Buddy scrambled forward, vanished again. When Evan found him, the dog was standing at the edge of a shallow ditch, tail rigid, nose pointing. A small figure was crouched under a tangle of knocked-down stalks, trying to make herself smaller. Her sneakers sucked at the mud, her hair stuck to her forehead. "Emma?" Evan said. She looked at him with that wild animal look children get when the world has gone too big. Lightning cracked so close the air snapped. Buddy moved between the child and the open sky, instinctively shielding her. "It's okay," Evan told her. "I've got you." "He found you." He nodded at Buddy, whose body was a tremble of held-back energy. "We're getting you out." The wind's hand tried to push them down. Evan lifted Emma, felt the smallness and the weight of her, everything he'd lost and everything he could still save, then pointed with his chin. "Lead boy," Buddy did. He took paths that weren't paths, punching through barricades of green, always stopping just long enough to make sure they followed. The maze gave way to the service rows at the edge of the field, then to the muddy parking lot where Mrs. Thornton screamed and ran, and a half-dozen townspeople surged forward, sobbing and laughing and clapping hands they didn't know what to do with. The sheriff's truck rolled in with a splash. Sheriff Dalton, square as a refrigerator, hopped out with a portable scanner in his hand. "Who's the hero?" he asked, scanning the crowd for a face to credit. A chorus of fingers pointed at Buddy. Dalton knelt, surprising everyone by moving slowly, respectfully. Buddy stood still as the scanner's cool arc passed over his neck. A beep. Dalton squinted at the screen. He looked up at Evan. "You the owner?" Evan's mouth went dry. "Yeah, I just bought him at the auction." Dalton's eyes darkened. "He's chipped to a John Miller," he said slowly. "Lived up in the hills until last spring. Old firefighter. Did search and rescue with a dog named Buddy." He looked at the dog again, something like recognition loosening the lines of his face. "This Buddy." The rain eased, as if the sky held its breath to listen. Grace from the auction, who'd followed the chaos, stepped closer, holding her phone. "John Miller," she said. "I know his daughter, Sarah. She moved back into town after he passed. She looked everywhere for the dog." "How did he end up at that auction?" Evan didn't have an answer. Buddy pressed a damp head into Evan's palm as if to ask permission. Evan scratched behind the torn ear and felt a surge of protectiveness so stark it was almost panic. The thought of this animal being sold like a machine made his vision pulse. "Let's call Sarah," Dalton said. They met at the station after the storm cleared. Sarah arrived with a man named Daniel, both of them moving like people trying not to break until the breaking could be done in private. When Buddy saw her, he didn't run or leap. He walked to her and sat, his eyes on her face. She sank to her knees. "Oh, Buddy," she whispered, hands shaking as they mapped the familiar geography of his skull, the raised scar by his ear, the swirl of fur at his chest. "Dad's boy." Her tears fell onto his coat like rain relearning how to be gentle. Daniel told the story in fits and starts. After John's stroke and slow, stubborn recovery, he'd pushed himself to get Buddy back into the work they both loved. But another health scare had put John in the hospital. Buddy had gone to a friend to be boarded, someone who saw a way to make a few quick dollars. By the time Sarah realized the friend had vanished, so had Buddy. "We called every shelter," she said. "We left flyers at every clinic. He never turned up." Evan listened with his hands laced together, the way he did when an engine's rattle had turned into a mystery he couldn't solve, and the air felt thick with old stories he should have known. He wanted to be angry. He wanted to hold on to what had just found him. He wanted to do the right thing fast. Buddy moved to him, nudged his knee with the blunt certainty of a creature that understood when somebody was losing their grip. Evan looked down into those steady, storm-dark eyes and knew the truth as simply as a bolt knows the hex of the wrench made for it. He cleared his throat. "He's yours," he said to Sarah. "He always was." Her relief cracked something open in the room. Daniel wrapped an arm around her shoulder. Sheriff Dalton sat back, exhaling. Grace, who had come to make sure the story didn't get swallowed by bureaucracy, dabbed her eyes with a crumpled napkin. But Buddy didn't move to Sarah's side. He looked between them, then padded to the door and sat, ears forward, waiting. Sheriff Dalton frowned. "What's he doing?" "Working," Daniel murmured. "That's his look when he hears something." They listened. The station hummed. Outside, the rumble of a truck drifted past. A dog barked. Somewhere a bicycle squeaked. Nothing unusual. Yet Buddy remained a statue of attention. Then, from the hallway, a thin metallic rattle, subtle, like a coin jar tipping in another room. Dalton stood, opened the door. The smell hit them first, sharp and wrong. "Smoke. Electrical panel," Daniel said. They moved as one. In a storage room off the hall, a scorched wire had set paper smoldering in a trash bin. A moment more, and the thin flame would have kissed the wood shelving. Dalton grabbed the extinguisher, while Evan and Daniel pulled the bin into the rain-scoured parking lot. The foam hissed. The flame died, sulked, then surrendered. Buddy's tail wagged exactly twice. When the adrenaline bled away, when the jokes had found their damned exit and the air tasted clean again, Sarah leaned against the doorframe and looked at Evan. "He picked you," she said softly. Evan shook his head. "He found me," he countered. "There's a difference," Sarah smiled through the ache. "Dad used to say Buddy was less a dog than a compass. He points to where people need to be." The weeks that followed moved like a film spliced with heartbeats. The county looked hard at the auction, at the handler who'd sold what wasn't his, at the rules that needed rewriting. Fines were levied, then swallowed by the larger question of change. People who'd laughed that day went quiet when they recalled the way Buddy had stood in the ring. Not begging, not dancing, just enduring. Evan kept showing up at Sarah's house, at first to check on Buddy, then because not checking felt like neglecting a part of himself that had finally started to mend. They took Buddy to the hills John used to walk. The dog grew almost buoyant out there, his gait loosening into a joyful, tireless stretch. Evan watched him catch scents like a sailor reading wind and realized that, for the first time since his father died, his own lungs were filling all the way. One Sunday, as the church bell counted to 9, Buddy's ears lifted at the second chime. He trotted to the edge of the Miller property and stood with his muzzle lifted. Evan looked at Sarah. "What's that?" She laughed softly. Dad trained him to mark certain times, briefing, water check, end of shift. The second chime at 9 was when they'd do a quick scan of their gear. Habit's a hard thing to kill. The habit saved another life. Late October brought a second storm, meaner, faster, the kind that slaps any sense out of a plan. Wind kicked a tree onto a back road where an old pickup lay crumpled at the bottom of a ditch. No one saw it happen, no sirens, just darkness and rain. Buddy, restless at the window, began that same exact behavior Evan now recognized, the alert without panic, the tug of a compass needle. They followed him into the night. He led them past the fallen road closed sign, down the slick slope, and straight to the truck where John Thornton, Emma's grandfather, was slumped over the wheel, conscious but fading. Together, Evan and Daniel hauled the door open. Buddy climbed in, bracing himself against the console, pressing his head against the man's chest like a living anchor while the others called for help. The paramedics said the delay would have cost the man his life. Word got around. When the volunteer fire department asked for help forming a community search and rescue team, Sarah looked at Evan before the sentence had fully left the captain's mouth. "Do it with me," she said. "For Dad, for Buddy, for whatever he's still pointing at." They trained in the cold and the heat, reading wind, reading topography, learning to translate a dog's nose into human maps. Buddy's joy was a current that tugged everyone forward. Evan laughed for the first time in months without feeling like he was stealing it from a grave. At the next county fair, the auction ring stood empty at the end of the day. The new rules were in place. Somewhere a child's balloon slipped free and climbed toward a sun that had fought its way back to full strength. Sheriff Dalton took the microphone and told the story, the whole story, with its sharp edges and soft landings. "Sometimes the things we throw away," he said, looking out at faces that had learned how to listen, "are the very things that save us." He called Evan and Sarah to the ring. He called Buddy, who trotted out like a soldier on parade, chest forward, eyes bright. The crowd didn't laugh this time. They stood, and the sound that rose was not a cheer exactly, not applause exactly. It was something warmed by gratitude and sharpened by the memory of the places where light had almost failed. Emma, brave now in the way children get when they've been handed back the world by a hand with fur, walked up and wrapped her arms around Buddy's neck. He held still, love written in the slow language of breathing. Evan looked at the dog, then at Sarah, then at the crowd, their tear-bright eyes, their hands twisting hats and programs, their hearts beating softly under Sunday shirts. He felt his father beside him, a warm absence, a wise ghost. He found Sarah's hand. "He wasn't a reject," he said into the microphone, the words shaking only a little. He was waiting for someone to see him. The gavel didn't fall this time. No one set a price. Buddy didn't need to be bought to belong. He had already taken ownership of the town in the simplest way possible, by finding its lost pieces and bringing them home. And if you were close enough to hear it, when the church bell rang 9 and the second chime hummed through the evening, you'd swear you could hear the soft thump of a tail answering back. Sometimes, the heart's compass points to the ones the world turns away from. Follow it, fast, before the moment passes. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more.